I'm Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Egypt and the Red Cross join the search for bodies of Israeli hostages in Gaza. The ASEAN Summit enters its second day, focusing on economic ties, trade and security. And Turkey has its eyes on a deal to buy Eurofighter jets as the UK's Prime Minister arrives in Ankara. First this evening, Egypt and the Red Cross have officially joined the search for the bodies of deceased hostages in Gaza, following recent approval by Israeli authorities to allow both teams to operate beyond the so-called Yellow Line. This is the boundary marking Israeli military control in the Gaza Strip.
Israel has allowed Egypt and Red Cross teams into Gaza as search for hostage bodies widens on Sunday. The teams were permitted to move beyond the so-called Yellow Line. That line marks the Israeli military's pullback zone in the Gaza Strip.
In full cooperation with Israel, the Prime Minister approved the entry of an Egyptian team into the Gaza Strip to assist in searching for our remains of our deceased hostages. Now, this is a technical team only, and none of these personnel are in the military. Now, the Red Cross and the Egyptian team are allowed entry beyond the IDF's Yellow Line position into Gaza territory to conduct the search for our hostages.
In the shades of Israel's decision, Red Cross and Hamas meet in attempt to locate bodies of deceased hostages in Gaza. They reportedly met members of Hamas's shadow unit in Rafah, who escorted them to sites believed to contain Israeli remains, according to Hamas-linked media. The latest development comes amid ongoing efforts to implement elements of a fragile agreement concerning hostages and post-war arrangements in the Gaza Strip. Up until now, Israel had not permitted the entry of such teams into Gaza. So far, Israel has repatriated the remains of 195 Palestinians, while Hamas has returned 15 bodies of Israeli hostages.
China has offered humanitarian assistance to the United States after 2 US Navy aircraft crashed into the South China Sea during military exercises. Beijing's foreign ministry said the accidents stem from frequent US military deployments in the region, which it claims undermine maritime security and regional stability. The crashes involving a Navy helicopter and a fighter jet happened within the same half hour during routine operations, according to the Navy's Pacific Fleet. All crew members were safely rescued and investigations have been launched to determine the causes of both crashes. Lithuania has announced plans to close its border with Belarus indefinitely after a series of airspace violations involving smuggler balloons. Prime Minister Inga Ronina said the incidents, which forced several airport closures last week, amount to hybrid attacks from across the border. Officials also warn Lithuania may seek NATO consultations if provocations continue.
So we are now ready for a decision to close the border with Belarus indefinitely, but only with certain exceptions. This means that diplomats and diplomatic mail will be able to move, and ours and EU citizens will be able to enter our country from Belarus, but all other movement will be closed. In this way, we are sending a signal to Belarus and saying that no hybrid attack will be tolerated here, and we will take all the strictest measures to stop such attacks. At the same time, the Ministry of Defence will take action, and as of today, the army will take all necessary measures, including kinetic ones, to shoot down balloons. We are ready to take even the most severe actions when our airspace is violated. We are also coordinating with our neighbours and may discuss activation of Article 4 of NATO.
Malaysia is keeping global economic and political issues high on its agenda, with ASEAN on the summit's second day. Tariffs and cross-border scam centres are up for discussion. Let's take a closer look.
It is the second day that Malaysia is hosting the 47th ASEAN Summit. The first day of summit showed serious political and economic outcomes for world. The US and China reached preliminary deal to ease trade tensions. Timor-Leste officially became the 11th member of ASEAN. Cambodia and Thailand signed a historic peace deal in Kuala Lumpur, witnessed by US President Donald Trump and Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, to end border hostilities and restore peace. And today, in the second day of ASEAN Summit, major outcomes continue to emerge. Top officials from China and the leaders of Brazil, Canada, the European Council and the 11-strong ASEAN bloc is working to solidify economic partnerships and hammer out trade pacts.
Thank you.
ASEAN leaders on Monday met their East Asian counterparts at the ASEAN +3 summit in Kuala Lumpur. The talks focused on tariffs and cross-border scam centre crimes, alongside a series of trade and bilateral meetings.
In particular, transnational crime, centred around organised crime networks such as scam centres, has recently threatened the safety and daily lives of countless people. Korea plans to strengthen its response system in close cooperation with ASEAN NAPO to prevent the spread of transnational crime and, furthermore, eradicate these networks.
Japan is currently serving as the chair of the trilateral summit among Japan, China and South Korea. With the upcoming summit in mind, Japan hopes to continue working closely with China and South Korea to promote forward-looking cooperation that will also benefit ASEAN countries.
The three-day summit will conclude on October 28th, leaving regional leaders to assess progress on security, trade and diplomatic cooperation, and to plan the next steps for ASEAN's role on the global stage.
Remaining in the region, Cambodia began withdrawing troops from its border with Thailand on Sunday night after signing an extended ceasefire deal in Malaysia with US President Donald Trump helping to mediate. Footage shows soldiers loading tanks onto trucks as part of the first phase of pullback. The agreement builds on a truce from 3 months ago, ending 5 days of fighting that killed at least 48 people and displaced hundreds of thousands. Moving on to trade, and China and the US have reached a preliminary agreement on key issues, including extending their trade truce, fentanyl control and export regulations. The announcement comes after 2 days of talks in Kuala Lumpur between China's Vice Premier and high officials within the US, Treasury and Trade Department. China did not provide further details on the agreed terms, but US President Donald Trump said he is confident of reaching a deal with Chinese President Xi Jinping, who he is expected to meet in South Korea. US President Donald Trump received a royal welcome from Emperor Naruhito at Tokyo's Imperial Palace. He became the first foreign leader to become Emperor Naruhito since his ascension in 2019. Describing the emperor as a great man, Trump is also scheduled to meet Japan's first female Prime Minister, Sainae Takaichi, on Tuesday. Their talks are expected to focus on Japan's planned $550 billion investment in the United States. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has invited the leaders of Central Asian countries to attend the Central Asia-US Summit next month. The summit is scheduled to be held in Washington on the 6th of November. Kazakhstan President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev sent a letter of gratitude to Donald Trump for the invitation. He noted that he shares the main goals of Donald Trump's domestic and foreign policy, in particular supporting traditional values based on common principles, as well as the American leaders' desire to maintain peace and security. In other news, the United Nations has called for the safe passage for trapped and terrified civilians in Sudan's El Fasher after fighters from the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary group, claim to have seized control of the besieged city. UN humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher expressed deep alarm over reports of civilian casualties and mass displacement amid fierce fighting in the city. He stressed that civilians must be granted access to humanitarian aid. According to the UN, approximately 260,000 civilians, half of them children, remain stranded in El Fasher without food or humanitarian assistance. Argentina's midterm elections have strengthened President Javier Milei's position in Congress. The victory gives him more leverage to push ahead with his economic reforms. Here's the latest.
Argentina's far-right president Javier Milei claimed a decisive victory in Sunday's midterm elections. According to initial results, his party, La Libertad Avanza, won 41% of the nationwide vote. The party boosted its lower house seats from 37 to 64 and won 13 of 24 Senate seats, strengthening Milei's mandate for deep spending cuts and economic reforms.
We will not only defend the reforms that have been made, but we will also promote the reforms that are still needed to achieve that future. We want to be a country that grows into the Argentina we should never have stopped being, to make Argentina great again.
The victory was praised by US President Donald Trump, who had previously threatened to cut a $40 billion aid package if Milei's coalition faltered. However, the Peronist opposition, including Buenos Aires province governor Axel Kicillof, struck a defiant tone.
Milei and the government are mistaken if they celebrate this election result, in which 6 out of 10 Argentines have said they disagree with the model they are proposing. They are also mistaken if they ignore the situation our people are going through, which is one of enormous suffering, marked by job losses and a decline in economic activity, where companies are closing every day, where the most vulnerable are suffering more and more every day.
Former President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner appeared on her balcony in Buenos Aires to greet supporters as crowds expressed concern over the election results.
It is not a productive project that provides jobs for people. It is a project based on debt, on taking on debt. I do not see it as favourable for the country, but that is democracy, and this is the result.
We have to be tolerant and respect the majority vote. Unfortunately, we have to prepare ourselves for situations that are going to be quite painful.
Despite opposition warnings, Milei vowed to consolidate reforms over the next 2 years, leveraging his strengthened presence in Congress.
Hurricane Melissa has moved into a Category 5 storm, the highest level on recorded, bringing destructive winds and flooding across the Caribbean. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says the storm, with winds up to 260 kilometers per hour, is battering Jamaica and moving northward toward Cuba. Authorities warn of life-threatening storm surges and heavy rain through the night. Welcome back to A News. Now to the US and China trade relations. During the ASEAN Summit, the US and China agreed a framework for a trade deal just days before President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping are due to meet. The agreement was forged on the sidelines of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit in Malaysia on Sunday. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the agreement would remove the threat of the imposition of 100% tariffs on Chinese imports starting next month, and include a final deal on the sale of TikTok in the US. Here to help me understand this and what we might expect when the two leaders meet is political risk analyst Ross Feingold. Welcome.
Thank you.
My first question is, the US and China have made some headway in regards to this announcement, but might we see more when the two leaders meet in South Korea? And can we expect more details of the agreement along with the sale of the popular social media app?
I would expect there to be more details to be released either in the coming days or when the two leaders meet, keeping in mind what Secretary of the Treasury Besson has shared publicly so far is very limited. And from the perspective of the United States, and specifically United States farmers, one of the big things they're waiting to hear is what are China's specific commitments with regard to the purchase of U.S. agricultural products, most notably soybeans, but other agricultural products as well. So there's definitely some more information that remains to be shared. And another aspect to keep in mind is members of the United States Congress are also going to be demanding details as well, not just Democrats, but even Republicans from President Trump's party as well, because many Republicans have been kind of skeptical of the TikTok deal because it would still keep the algorithm in the control of the Chinese company. So definitely more details need to be revealed about the scope of this agreement.
Definitely, and with alongside that, obviously China didn't want to pay 100% tariffs, I'm sure. Do you think there will be other deals that will be made when the two leaders meet as well?
Again, it's a wide relationship. There's so many different types of goods involved. And another aspect of this as well is services trade, because historically the United States has actually had a surplus in trade and services. We hear so much about trading goods and those container ships coming from factories in China to the United States. But the United States does export services like financial services to China, but there's a lot of non-tariff trade barriers, market entry restrictions, and things of that nature that United States and big U.S. companies have also been seeking a resolution and easier access to the market. So again, there's definitely many more details yet to be revealed, but it is possible that what they agree to will be a wider scope. It's not just going to be about TikTok. It's not just going to be about China's export of those rare earths or critical minerals. There's a number of other areas that it's very possible that they will announce something.
So there's been quite a bit of tension between these two countries, especially because China controls 90% of the refineries of rare earths. Who do you think has a stronger hand in these negotiations between the two leaders?
Yeah, there's so much discussion about that, and a lot of people assume that China has the upper hand. But as you mentioned, China doesn't want its goods to face 100% or higher tariffs on entering the United States. That would make them so uncompetitive, and Chinese manufacturers and exporters, they just wouldn't be able to sell product to the United States. That would cause a lot of problems for the Chinese economy, and manufacturers and people who work in factories might lose their jobs. Now, even though China's been trying to diversify its export markets and grow other markets like Europe or the Middle East or Africa, but the United States is still an important market. So the United States is not without leverage here, although people often just point to China's refining capability and its 90% market share for the rare earths refining or processing. But the United States is definitely not totally without leverage here.
And might we see more partnerships and deals, as you mentioned previously before, and in the sense of how much do these two countries need each other for economic growth?
Yeah, that's really remains to be seen, because based on recent experience, even during the first 8 months of the second Trump administration, we're going back to that phase one trade deal in January of 2020 between the first Trump administration and China. The reality is that it seems very common for the two sides to reach a deal, but then things go wrong, and then each side starts taking retaliatory measures, whether that's raising tariffs, not buying certain products, as we've seen with China not buying U.S. agricultural products. So the trick here and the challenge is to implement faithfully whatever the two sides agree to. But again, it's clear that for a number of reasons, that's been a challenge in recent years.
And Trump is also due to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. How do you think that meeting will go, and what could come out of that?
If this meeting really does go ahead, I would say it's a positive. Trump is going to get a lot of criticism for doing that. People say you met with him 3 times during your first term, no deal was made, and that's true. And that kind of just left things the way they were before. That unfortunately, North Korea continues to develop its missile and nuclear capabilities. It continues to find ways to evade sanctions. So Trump can meet with Kim. He cannot meet with Kim, and the reality is, North Korea is going to continue to engage in its nefarious activities. Is it likely that they'll reach a deal? Nah, they didn't reach a deal the first 3 times they met, so why would the 4th time reach a deal? But they might as well be talking. It's better than not talking.
And just going back to the ASEAN Summit, we know that Trump was a mediator between Cambodia and Thailand. Now he is setting himself up as the peace negotiator in regards to bringing countries together. How important do you think that was on the global scale?
He's certainly developing a reputation for mediating disputes. To be fair to President Trump, he has done that successfully in a number of places. Now, there's a lot of debate about what role he actually played in these different agreements. And most notably, India vehemently objects to President Trump saying that he was the key man in bringing about a ceasefire between India and Pakistan earlier this year. But I think Trump deserves credit for putting the resources and reputation of his administration, sending special envoys or being directly involved himself. And he deserves credit for his willingness to do that. He could have simply said, this has nothing to do with me, nothing to do with the United States. Now, we know that President Trump has a goal here. He wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And frankly, if he does help negotiate a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, it would be really hard to deny him the Nobel Peace Prize next year.
Well, that actually moves quite nicely onto my next question in regards to Trump and meeting Xi Jinping, who is, Xi Jinping, obviously we know, is very close to President Putin over in Russia. Do you think that a conversation might happen in relation to the war in Ukraine? Could an outcome be helpful in regards to Trump speaking to the Chinese leader in regards to Ukraine to put pressure on Russia?
I think Trump might bring up the issue of China buying natural resources from Russia, which helps fund Russia's invasion and war of aggression against Ukraine. But would Trump ask Xi Jinping to put pressure on Putin to end the war? No, I don't think so. And that for a number of reasons. One, the Biden administration tried that multiple times, and that it just didn't work. Xi Jinping wasn't going to do that, and the Trump people know that. But also, Trump likes to say that he has a good relationship with Putin. He met with him in Alaska not long ago. There was talk in recent weeks of another meeting, possibly in Budapest, although now it seems to be on hold. But if Trump wants to be involved personally, then he could meet with Putin. He could call Putin, which he's done recently as well. He doesn't need the intervention of Xi Jinping. And frankly, that's kind of not really aligned with Trump's style anyway, to say, hey, Xi Jinping, I need your help negotiating with Putin. That's just not Trump's style.
It seems that China also wants to align in relation to making sure that he appeases to the US as well as his close ally, which is Russia. Why do you think that's important for China in regards to these talks that the leader will have with President Trump this week?
Trump and his team, they're very skeptical of multilateral organizations, whether that's the UN or the WHO, the WTO, and other ones. And Trump doesn't really like multilateral meetings, even though he's going to the ASEAN meeting and the APEC meeting on this trip. He really prefers one-on-one interaction. Now, China's taken a different approach. They're starting to say, we're the champion of multilateralism, a multipolar world. We love these multilateral organizations. We're going to give money to them, help them with the budget shortfall if the U.S. cuts back. And of course, they put their own people into leadership positions in these organizations. But the key thing here in answering your question is China wants to portray itself as a leader in a multipolar world. So that's being more involved in dispute settlement. For example, it's been involved in the Middle East. It tried to bring Hamas and the Palestinian Authority together. A couple of years ago, it brought Saudi Arabia and Iran back together, being involved in Myanmar. China is trying to position itself as a key global political player, not just an economic or a military power. And so they don't want to be left aside. If there is a deal to be reached between Russia and Ukraine, China might not be the mediator, which Trump is trying to be, but China would be one of the first countries to say to Ukraine, we're ready to buy your exports again. We want to buy your agricultural exports like we did previously. And they're not going to have second thoughts about Russia's reaction. So China will try to position itself as a friend to all.
Yes, and with that, obviously, China and Europe and coming together, their particular relationship, also within trade and its global position, how important is that relationship as well?
A lot of major European companies from different sectors, whether that's automotive or chemicals, fashion, luxury goods, they rely heavily on the Chinese market. And every time that politicians, whether that's national level politicians, members of parliament, foreign ministers, or at the European Union institutions criticize China, they get feedback from the corporate world who says, we can't blow up this relationship. We can't blow it up politically because it'll have an effect on our ability to do business and frankly make money in China. On the other hand, there are also politicians as well as businesses that are very concerned about the size of China's exports and their ability to manufacture cheaply and ship goods to Europe. This overcapacity issue in China, and Europe has been on the other side of that with lots of Chinese goods coming into Europe. There's concerns about China's extraordinary ability to manufacture electric vehicles, which is the challenge there for Europe is they support electric vehicles. They want to transition. And China's saying, we make them well, and we make them cheaply. But then Europe says, well, wait a sec, we got to think about our own auto manufacturers. So there's a lot of give and take. And then there's the other political issues, which the Europeans, despite the concerns or the complaints of the corporate world, they do bring up. It's things like human rights and religious freedom, Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan. The European institutions often bring up these issues, and then the Chinese get very angry.
I think your connection just went. So thank you so much, Mr. Feingold. Thank you for joining me this evening. Thank you. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. First, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is visiting Turkey for high-level talks with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as both sides look to strengthen defence and economic ties. Here's more from our correspondent Zeynep Farazadeh.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in Turkey today for talks with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The discussions are expected to focus on strengthening relations between the two countries, including progress on a proposed deal to supply 40 Eurofighter Typhoon jets to Turkey. The multi-billion-pound agreement, first announced in July, aims to deepen defence cooperation between London and Ankara. According to Turkish officials, the two leaders will also discuss wide regional and international developments. Negotiations over the Typhoon deal have continued in recent months, with talks centered on technical specifications and pricing. The agreement is also expected to help support thousands of jobs in the UK's aerospace sector, which plays a key role in producing the fighter jets. Both governments have described the partnership as strategically important, highlighting growing economic and defense ties between the two NATO allies. Zeynep Farazadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
There are strong signs of progress in the latest round of talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The three-day negotiations in Istanbul are expected to conclude later today, with both sides working to resolve their outstanding issues. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has this report.
The negotiations were convened after weeks of mounting friction along the shared border, including closures of key crossings and escalating security incidents that affected both civilians and commercial transport. Officials from both countries say they are under increasing pressure to restore stability and economic movement. Foreign Ministry sources have told A News that both delegations have reached agreement on most key issues during negotiations in Istanbul. Only a few points remain unresolved, and officials expect those to be finalized before the end of today. The discussions may continue late into the night. A joint statement is anticipated once the talks conclude. It is expected to include the extension of the current ceasefire, the reopening of routes, and confirmation of the next meeting's location and date. During a separate diplomatic event in Malaysia, where Thailand and Cambodia signed a ceasefire agreement, United States President Donald Trump again asserted that resolving the dispute between Afghanistan and Pakistan would be straightforward for him. This marks the third time he has made that claim. Regional observers remain cautious, although they acknowledge that the progress reported tonight could mark a meaningful step toward reducing long-standing tension between the neighbors. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
The mayor of Gyumri in Armenia, Vadan Kasyan, faces new charges over statements aimed at renouncing or restricting the country's sovereignty by using or threatening to use violence. The remarks made at the anti-corruption court in September referenced forming alliances with other countries. His lawyers say the charges are politically motivated. Earlier this month, Kasyan and several others were detained in a bribery case. The arrest sparked clashes with supporters, prompting police and special forces to intervene. Iran's transport minister says Russia will provide $1.6 billion to complete the Rasht-Astara railway. The project will connect Iran, Azerbaijan and Russia. Our correspondent Tarar Shiralilu brings more from Tehran.
Iran's Minister of Road and Urban Development, Farzaneh Sadegh, said the contract on construction of the Rasht-Astara railway in the Iranian province of Gilan will be concluded next month in Russia. Also, her deputy, Hushain Bazvand, announced Russia's agreement to finance the railway project worth $1.6 billion. Speaking to reporters on the sidelines of launching a road development project in central Iran, the minister said final agreement on signing the Rasht-Astara railway project was reached earlier this month during her visit to Azerbaijan. She said that the trilateral meeting on transport and cargo transit cooperation between Iran, Azerbaijan and Russia in Baku was an important event that focused on completion of the international north-south transport corridor. The Astara-Rasht railway is the missing link of the 7,200-kilometer long north-south corridor that will integrate railways of Iran, Azerbaijan, Russia and India. The project is 162 kilometers long, consisting of 8 stations, 56 bridges and 35 overpasses. According to the minister's deputy, Bazvand, Russia has agreed to provide Iran with $1.6 billion in low-cost facilities at a 3% interest rate for the construction of the Rasht-Astara railway. Following the Iranian minister's visit to Baku, Sadegh said that in a meeting with Azerbaijani officials, both sides reviewed the progress of joint transport and transit projects and agreed on organizing transit of goods at the border. Sadegh, who is also the co-chairperson of Azerbaijan-Iran Joint Economic Cooperation Commission, added that progress of joint infrastructure projects demonstrates Baku and Tehran's firm determination to advance their shared development objectives. Tarar Shiralilu, Tehran, A News.
Georgia and Azerbaijan are reinforcing their security partnership, focusing on joint counter-terrorism efforts and regional cooperation. Nini Nikolashvili has more from the Georgian capital.
The head of Georgia's State Security Service, Mamuk Abdinardze, welcomed his Azerbaijani counterpart Ali Nagiev for an official visit focused on deepening intelligence and counterterrorism cooperation. Behind the formalities, the message was clear. Both countries see their partnership as vital to safeguarding the region from emerging threats and external pressures. According to the State Security Service, discussions centered on real-time information sharing, coordinated responses to hybrid threats, and closer collaboration against transnational crime. The officials underlined that cooperation between Tbilisi and Baku is not only about security, it's about reinforcing trust between two neighbors whose stability underpins the entire South Caucasus. Following the talks, Abdinardze and Nagiev paid tribute to fallen heroes in Tbilisi, laying wreaths at national memorials, a symbolic act underscoring shared values of sovereignty and peace. This meeting sends a clear signal. Amid regional uncertainty, Georgia and Azerbaijan are choosing partnership, pragmatism, and peace as the anchors of their security future. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Welcome back to A News. Now, looking now to Iran and the announcement of a major construction deal with Russia. On Sunday, Iran's Minister of Roads and Urban Development said an agreement will be signed next month, marking a major step in advancing the international north-south transport corridor. Here to discuss this in more detail is Faramaz Fabod, instructor of political science at the Moravian University in the US. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
My first question is this a great achievement? Only because we have been here before, years of an agreement pending in the background, but to no fruition. Is this something to actually celebrate?
I believe so. You're absolutely correct that foundations of this deal goes back to the year 2000 between Iran, India, and Russia. And over the years, it had encountered many, problems, mostly cost and engineering issues that had delayed it. But it seems like the deal that was made recently and was announced by Farzaneh Sadegh, the Iranian Minister of Road and Economic Development, it seems a very serious agreement. All sides seems to be on board, and as far as we can tell, the construction would probably begin next month and probably ends in 2026, and operations would begin then. So I'm very optimistic about it.
And if everything does go to plan, what are the economic benefits that this might bring to the region, and how might Azerbaijan also benefit from that?
Well, it's an important part of, I believe, Eurasian integration in terms of infrastructure and transit and roads and lanes that connect cargo and shipments of goods all the way from, let's say, India to Iran to Azerbaijan to Russia to Northern Europe to Central Europe. And obviously, if it succeeds, which I believe it will succeed, it will cost the transit costs and transit time of shipments by half, it seems that way, and the transit costs maybe by third or half. We'll see how it goes, but those are the estimates that we are hearing. And of course, the Astara, the site that's in Iran and the site that's in Azerbaijan will be a very important hub of that transaction or transmission or transportation of these goods. And, it's been some years that the capacity of that area, the Astara stations have been elevated, but once this construction finalizes and transportations begin, we will see that that capacity has been built for this sort of activity. And both sides will obviously benefit greatly from the transit. I think Azerbaijan might become the central hub of the transit cargoes as a result.
And what could there, if there is any hurdles ahead that needs to be resolved? And how long will this project take?
Well, the hurdles were mostly on the Iran side with the rash
to the city of Rasht, the city of Astara, which was this missing link of this 7,200 kilometers of the international, north-south transport corridor. And some of the issues had to do with surveying the land. The contracts with Russia seems to have solved that. Some of it had to do with Iran had to purchase the lands. It seems like, as far as I know, maybe more than half of it has been purchased. And apparently the surveying by Russian contractors have already begun. So I don't expect many more of these kind of difficulties on the ground.
And Russia is definitely trying to mark its position in the South Caucasus and Central Asia. Why do you think that's important to them, especially at this time?
Well, it's important both to Russia and to Iran because both of these countries are under tremendous sanctions by the United States. And this Eurasian integration that this represents, you could read it as a way of trying to overcome some of the effects of sanctions. And if they do succeed, it could be that this transport hub or transport routes overtake some of the maritime transports that the West prefers and attempts to isolate Iran and Russia as a result of that.
And how might you describe the two leaders or countries' relationship between Russia and Iran?
Well, I think they have actually moved much closer to each other as a result of being under sanctions by the West. I don't think, Russia in the years ago wanted to move as close as it is now to Iran, but I think because of the sanctions, both Iran and Russia have become much closer. And I think we are seeing even closer than before after the 12-day attack on Iran by Israel that was joined by United States.
And how important is the deal for Iran and the future of advancing transport in that area?
Well, it's very important because these developing the road and infrastructure remains central to Iran's vision, actually, of regional development and economic integration. And that was stressed by the Minister of Roads and Economic Development, Farzaneh Sadeh, very recently in her announcement of this deal.
And does this corridor offer Russia an alternative to Western control in regards to trade routes, as you mentioned, because of the two sanctioned countries?
Yes, I believe so. I think that's one aim of it, although it makes tremendous economic sense because it reduces the cost of transit and time of transit. So economically, it's rational, but also geostrategically, it makes sense for both Iran and Russia because it allows them to overcome the restrictions that sanctions impose on them.
And the trade within Iran, do you feel that this will boost its economic power in this area, in this particular route?
I believe so. Once it's completed, then you will see a much larger volume of transports of goods and cargo that goes through this part of Iran as well. And of course, Iran is not relying on this only. Iran is also dealing with other routes with Pakistan and using Pakistan as an intermediary to connect Chinese goods from China come to Pakistan and come to Iran, and connect Eurasia with Caucasus using Pakistan and Iran as intermediary hubs. So yeah, I believe so. These are part of the plans of Iran to maybe, let's say, secure itself more firmly in the face of economic sanctions that it faces.
And what are the other opportunities, as you touched upon, that Iran can take in regards to different trade routes within this? We've got North and South. We also got the new route with Azerbaijan and Armenia. But in regards to Iran particularly and Russia, what other opportunities could we see coming out of this?
Well, as far as Iran is concerned, I already mentioned the connection to Pakistan and connecting, Eurasia to Caucasus and Iran and Pakistan in the middle. So that's a crucial thing. And of course, if this thing goes through, the Bandar Abbas port in the south of Iran gets connected all the way to Russia, and Russian trains can come easily from all the way from north of Russia, close to the its frontiers with Western Europe and Central Europe, all the way to Bandar Abbas in a very clear path, easy path, without much obstacles on its way. So I see that as very central.
And could this project pave the way for future joint ventures in energy or technology with Russia, do you think?
It should. Every time you have successful endeavors with participants participating and committing to their, let's say, plans, then it should be something that could be emulated in future in domains of relationship between the countries. I expect that between both Iran, Azerbaijan, and Russia, and perhaps even India, because India is a significant participant in this as well.
Well, thank you for those insights and for joining me this evening. Thank you, Mr. Farbod.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, you're now up to date with the world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.